help you fly, you gotta again.
Online, we're so glad to have you with us. In these unbearable times, it is wonderful to be in solidarity with all of you as we look at how to respond to over 1 year of genocide and obviously decades of occupation and apartheid. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Rula Odeh. I'm the chair of Canadian Friends of Sabeel, and I'm a Canadian. Actually, I live in Montreal. I'm a Canadian of Palestinian and Christian origin. And I've been the chair of Canadian Friends of Sabeel for several years now. I fill in the very big shoes left by Father Robert Asali, which I know many of you knew, and unfortunately we were saddened to lose him in 2023. But we continue on with his legacy of courage and advocacy, continuing with the work that we're doing here tonight, and I'll share with you some of the other activities we're doing as well. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. If you could please turn off your phones and gadgets and anything that could possibly make a noise during the evening. If you need the washrooms, there are some. If you go to the right and downstairs, there are washrooms. If you need the accessible washrooms, you need to go all the way to the left, to the end, and there are some accessible washrooms there. Please. Of the reality of settler colonialism here in Canada. So I offer this acknowledgement, this land acknowledgement, as a way of reminding ourselves that the colonization and oppression of Palestinians is similar to the colonization and oppression of Indigenous peoples here in Turtle Island. So we are called not only to work for justice and freedom and self-determination for Palestinians, but also for the First Nations, the Métis and the Inuit here at home. So I acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is in the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I'm humbled to acknowledge that those who have come before us, those who provide stewardship on the land for thousands of years, and continue to share the land and teachings with those of us who are settlers, I believe we all have a responsibility not only to acknowledge the grounds on which we are privileged to live and work, but to continue to grow our learning of indigenous histories and realities in order to move towards meaningful reconciliation. I'd like to just tell you a little bit about Canadian Friends of Sabeel. So for those of you who are not so familiar with us, we're a national ecumenical response to the call of Palestinian Christians for solidarity. And through education and an engagement of the Canadian Christian community, we support the struggle for equality, injustice, freedom, and human rights of Palestinians living under apartheid and the illegal Israeli military occupation. With partners around the world, we work nonviolently for a just and durable peace for Palestinians and Israelis. I'd like to now talk a little bit about the James Graff Memorial Lecture. So the James Graff Memorial Lecture is named in honor of and in memory of James Graff. I'd like to tell you a little bit about him. So we honor the legacy of James Allen Graff through the annual lectureship, this annual lectureship. James Graff was an ethicist and professor of philosophy at the University of Toronto from the 1960s to 2002. Long before others in Canada, he became a passionate advocate for Palestinian rights, speaking and writing widely to raise public awareness of the plight of the Palestinians living under Israeli occupation. In 1984, he established the Near East Cultural and Educational Foundation, also known as NECEF, to advance understanding in Canada of the history, cultural realities of the Arab world, and also to fund humanitarian education and advance understanding in Canada of the history, cultural realities of the Arab world, and to fund humanitarian educational and health initiatives in the Middle East. For many years, he also served as vice chair of the North American Coordinating Committee for non-governmental organizations on the question of Palestine. He was a friend and mentor to many people on the journey of supporting and acting in solidarity with Palestinians. James Graff passed away in 2005, and his organization NECEF joined with Canadian Friends of Sabeel in 2012, so that legally our organization is now known as NECEF Sabeel, but our work is under Canadian Friends of Sabeel. We're very pleased tonight to have Dr. Ida Farag Graff, the widow of James Graff, and also their daughter, Nuha. They're here tonight, and I'd like to ask them to stand up and welcome them. Please join me in welcoming them. Dr. Ida Graff is an Egyptian-Canadian and a writer and poet. Like her husband, she was a professor at the University of Toronto for many years. So Dr. Graff, we welcome you this evening, and we thank you also for your own role in supporting the people of Palestine as well. I'd like to take a quick moment to just thank all the donors who've been donating in support of this event, also all the co-sponsors of the event. So in particular, I wanted to mention the following organizations. So Anjapi, Catholics for Justice and Peace in the Holy Land, Just Peace Advocates, the United Church, and the Mennonite Church. So thank you to all these organizations and churches for co-sponsoring tonight. I'd also like to give a very special thank you to the planning committee for this event. So Esther Eptison, who couldn't be here tonight as she's expecting her granddaughter to be born at any minute, but I know she's watching, so thank you, Esther, for all your hard work in leading this effort this year, along with, so Esther is one of our board members, also Jeff Nowers is one of our board members who participated, Rana Ati, who's our executive director, Kathleen Tannell, Anne McGregor O'Neill, Anne-Marie Jackson, and also many of the volunteers that are here tonight. So I just wanted to say a very special thank you to all of you for organizing this. Perhaps we'll give a round of applause for the volunteers. And now I'd like to introduce you to an opening song called Kites. It will be performed by Samia Odeh, who, yes, she is my sister, but she is in her own right a very accomplished musician, composer, performer, recorded artist. She is the music director at the United Church, Wall Street United Church in Brockville, Ontario, and she's also the founder and owner of the Canada Music Academy of Music and also the Montreal Academy. So she has been using her music as a way of showing solidarity for the Palestinians and This is a song called Kites. She'll share with you a little bit more about how she composed it and what's the significance of it. So over to you, Samia.
Thank you. Good evening. In 2011, the children of Gaza won the Guinness World Book of Records for flying the most kites in the world. And they flew 12,365 or so kites. And as I watched the video of them, and you'll see that at the beginning of this video, I wondered about them. I wondered, how will we help these kids, those children and their children, fly their kites again? And so this song is called Kites, and it's dedicated to the children of Gaza, children of Palestine, and really for the children of the world and humanity. And it's a call to action. So I hope it speaks to you. You can go ahead and start the video. How do I help you fly your kite again? How do we help the world to see your plight and pain? Oh Lord, help us to see, and we call all humanity. How do I help you to fly your kite again? How do we cross all these fears, the truth and light? How can we face this moment of grace and all this time? Oh Lord, help us to see, and we call all humanity. How do I help you to fly? How can we help the world to see again? Fly your kite again. Sing with me. Fly your kite. Fly your kite again. Fly your kite. Hallelujah. Fly your kite again. Fly, little angel, fly. Fly, little angel, fly. Fly, little angel, hallelujah, one day you will fly again.
Thank you, Samia. So I'd like to introduce to you our moderator for our panel discussion today, the Reverend Dr. Dorcas Gordon is the Principal Emerita of Knox College, Presbyterian Church in Canada. She has served at the Toronto School of Theology in the University of Toronto from 1994 to 2017, most recently as the principal of Knox College, where she continues as Principal Emerita. She holds 3 of 4 degrees from Knox College or University of Toronto. Through her career, her focus has been local and international, having served as president of the Association of Theological Schools in the United States and Canada, and at international assemblies of the World Council of Churches and the World Alliance of Reformed Churches and the World Communion of Reformed Churches as a consultant in gender justice. She has taught in Ghana, Malawi, and Cuba, and as principal established partnerships with seminaries in Cuba, Korea, and Taiwan. Presently, she serves on the board of Canadian Friends of Sabeel and represents the Presbyterian Church in Canada as a board member and of the Foundation of Theological Education in Asia and the Pacific. She has led 6 studies tours to Palestine, Israel, and over the past 15 years, in addition to spending sabbatical time in Jerusalem and time spent in personal visits with Palestinian friends. She continues her involvement with Canadian and Palestinian organizations committed to justice and peace. So please welcome Dorcas, who will then introduce you to our guests today. So welcome, Dorcas. So Dorcas will be introducing our guest speakers, Shadia and Danielle. She has the full bio for them. And these are young up-and-coming Palestinian Christians that have a lot to say, and we have a lot to learn from them. So looking forward to hearing you. Thank you.
It is such an honor to be here with you this evening and to moderate the panel, especially as I've got to know Shadia and Daniel in terms of their lives, their work, their advocacy for Palestinians, and being Palestinians themselves, they are able to help us know and feel even more the situation that we may be distant from in some ways here in Canada. They agreed that they would like to introduce themselves through the first question, but I would like to just say a little bit about them. Shadia Qubti has worked in faith-based peace building and advocacy initiatives through local and international organizations in Israel and Palestine for 15 years. She's particularly focused on amplifying the voices and perspectives of women and other minorities in various ways, one of which was in the Women Behind the Wall podcast. She's recently been studying at the Vancouver School of Theology on interreligious and indigenous Palestinian and North American understandings of the land. So we are truly blessed to have her with us this evening. Daniel Bannoura. I just met Daniel yesterday when I picked him up from the airport, and the conversation never stopped as we spoke about many things over lunch. He's from Beit Sahur and is a PhD candidate at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana. I won't tell you about his research, except to say that it's to do with Christian-Muslim relations and Palestinian theology. And I know that he is working hard to complete by May of 2025. But he's also working very hard at being a father of a 16-month-old son. So sometimes the two do conflict. He's on the organizing committee of Christ at the Checkpoint and is also co-host of Across the Divide, a podcast that provides space for, listen to this, thoughtful conversations about Israel, Palestine through the lens of faith and peacekeeping. So I know we are in for a wonderful evening with the two of them, and let me, without further ado, just get started. Over the next 50 minutes, I'm going to ask them 4 questions. I will be the timekeeper, so I don't get to say very much except when I present my questions to them. But I want also to have a chance for you as the audience here in the room and those online to ask your questions. So Rula mentioned that those questions will be collected. For those online through the chat function, please present your questions there. And for those here in the room, there will be volunteers that will be mingling among you, probably during my 3rd question, to pick up your questions that you'd like to address to Shadia and to Daniel. So let me get started with the first question. So I'm going to ask, this is to be a bit of a conversation, so I'm going to turn this way. Let me begin by asking you, Shadia and Daniel, briefly to introduce yourselves in terms of your personal connections to Palestine. Shadia, you're from Nazareth, one of approximately 2 million Palestinians living within Israel, considered citizens of Israel, Arab citizens of Israel, but clearly with a lot of limitations. And Daniel, you grew up in Beit Sahur within the West Bank, which is in its 58th year of an increasingly restrictive and violent Israeli military occupation. Both your contexts are that of 76 years since the Nakba and the ongoing, endless ethnic cleansing that continues, an ethnic cleansing of Palestinian land, people, and cultures. So Shadia, would you begin the conversation with a brief reflection on yourself and your context?
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. I made a little slide to kind of introduce myself and help you introduce through my positionality, get to know more about my context. And on the left there, you have, where you are born dictates access to resources and basic rights. So Palestinians are divided into 5 locations. And based on that, they get access to certain privileges. So there's Palestinians who remained in their homes when the Nakba happened and Israel was established. And then there are Palestinians in Gaza, Palestinians in East Jerusalem, West Bank, and of course, diaspora. I grew up in Nazareth, so that puts me in the category of those who are from Israel. And I put, if you can see the demographic based on the Israeli Bureau of Statistics, there are about 10 million people as of last year. Of them, 21.1% of the population, they're actually Palestinian. When I did one of my first masters, I was looking into that majority-minority relationship and found 33 terms referring to my people group. And the government of Israel calls us a specific name, which I don't necessarily agree with, so I will use the term Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. And of course, there are majority Jewish Israelis and others. And then within the Palestinian group, there are Christians and Muslims. So there's 1.5% Christian, which is kind of my, again, we zoom into that second level of minority. And within the Christian community, there's a spectrum of denominations, and please, if you are an expert in church history, excuse my own, this is my own division of how I understand church history. So there's the Catholic, Eastern Church, Protestants, and other. My paternal ancestry is Coptic, that's hence my last name. My maternal ancestry is Greek Orthodox, But both my parents, by the time I was born, they actually were practicing Baptists. So I grew up evangelical, and that's really even a minority within that Christian spectrum. So my perspective and maybe my positionality is a very small niche representation of the population, but this is the life of many Palestinians. We are quite diverse. We reflect a lot of different backgrounds, but a lot of us can trace our ancestry to the first Christians. For example, the Copts believe that they were the first Egyptians to convert through the pilgrimage of Apostle Mark. I don't know if that's true or not, but according to legend, so many of us honor that lineage, both spiritually and other. But since October 7th, I don't know if you have been following what's been happening to Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. There's been a huge crackdown on Palestinian expression. I think there is a center for Adala that looks into cases where Palestinians were arrested simply for posting something on social media or liking a post on social media. I think the policies of intimidation and fear has been very, very utilized among my population, especially using maybe people more famous or more prominent to kind of ensure that no one says anything that might be against the genocide. Most prominent is a Palestinian singer, Dalal Abu Amni, and the professor Nadira Shalhoub Kevorkian, who was arrested as well, who she basically said something related to her academic profession. So it's been really hard to see how much this crackdown has been enforced on my people. And at the same time, crime has increased. We have a problem of crime among Palestinians in Israel. And crime is under the supervision of the National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's not really doing anything to solve the issue. And I remember when I went to visit my family last year, they had a death toll counter for how many Palestinians are being killed just from crime, and it's been a big issue. It's a really, really disheartening issue to my community and my people.
Hi everyone, it's good to be with all of you here and also online. So yeah, I'll introduce myself and can I give you a small narrative of my story and my background. So yeah, I grew up in Beit Sahur, which is a small town east of Bethlehem. It's the biblical shepherd's field. So one of my grandparents was one of those shepherds that the angels appear to. I'm kidding. I don't know that. I'm kidding. But I come from that long lineage of Palestinian or native people who call themselves Christians, who lived in that land that is called Palestine. My family is Orthodox, but my immediate family is Protestant. I grew up in the hopeful 90s, after the Oslo agreements, this idea of this fantasy of peace that we had. We can talk about peace later if you want. And then through the second Intifada in the 2000s and the kind of the trauma and the violence and the bloodshed during the second Intifada, was involved in, during then I was involved in a lot of political action, was involved in different organizations and movements, mostly nonviolent protest and otherwise, and also knowledge production, working as a youth growing up trying to reclaim my identity and my heritage and my history as a Palestinian. However, at some point, I just wanted to escape Palestine. So as soon as I finished high school, I went to the US to do a degree in physics, out of all things. It's like, what is far away from religion and politics? What is the farthest thing away from it? Physics. I'm going to do physics. So I did a degree in physics, and then through personal encounters, I got interested in theology and philosophy and Islam. So I got a degree in theology in London, and then a second degree in Islamic studies from the University of Chicago. And then at the University of Chicago, I kind of developed this yearning to be in Palestine for a lot of reasons, but one of them for me, because of my encounter with systemic racism where I was, There's a long story here about the University of Chicago and the gentrification that was happening in Hyde Park, where the university is, where the university was buying up property and pushing out African Americans who were living in Hyde Park because they were not received into the city of Chicago itself. And then I realized there's a complicity. I was part of this system that normalized gentrification of African Americans, and I did not want to be part of that system. And that's kind of where the yearning for me to be, rather than being part of that system of power and of knowledge and of privilege in the academy, there's a need for me to be back with my people. So I went back to Palestine, and then I opened a coffee shop, because why not? I started coaching Ultimate Frisbee, and eventually founded the Palestinian Association for Ultimate Frisbee. It's called Ultimate Palestine. So I'm the founder and first president of that, my claim to fame. And then in 2016, I got an offer to teach at Bethlehem Bible College. And that's when there was this reconciliation of my identity and my faith and my activism through teaching at an evangelical institution, so conservative evangelical, but also committed to the Palestinian, to defending the Palestinian narrative, especially in response to Christian Zionism. And that is how I got engaged with and involved with this development of Palestinian theology, a Palestinian Christian response to the occupation. That led to a renewed interest in returning to the academy. So in 2020, after I got COVID in February, I was one of the first who got COVID in 2020. I moved back to the US in August to do my PhD in Quranic studies at the University of Notre Dame, which is where I'm right now finishing my PhD, working on the Quran. If you're interested, I can tell you why and what I'm doing. But through all my experience at Bethlehem Bible College and what I'm doing now, especially since the war, as Palestinian Christians and as theologians, we have found our voice, I think, in a more profound way, to critique and to respond to oppression and violence in a coherent way, to respond to the pernicious influence of Christian Zionism, especially in the West, and especially how that theology has played a significant role in our lives. So no matter how I tried to escape Palestine, Palestine always beckoned me back. We have a saying, and I'll finish here I hear it from my friends in Palestine who are refugees, who would tell you, you can leave the refugee camp, but the refugee camp would never leave you. And in many ways that kind of applies to me. I can try to leave Palestine, but Palestine would never leave me. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell.
Thank you both very much. This gets us off to a very good start with lots of things for us to think about. When I was speaking to Daniel before the lecture this evening, he said I ask very long questions. So I'm going to ask you to bear with me as I go to my second question. Shadia and Daniel, our poster for this evening has identified Shadia, you as an activist, and you, Daniel, as a theologian. However, in listening to you speak over the past few minutes, it's evident that both of you are deeply committed to both activism and thinking theologically. In other words, both of you are really activist and theologian. So I'd like you to think about these titles and in thinking about them, how would you focus or probe the theme of our 2024 lecture? 1 year out, our response to genocide and occupation in Palestine. So thinking about those two titles that you've been given, and you may want to add a third or a fourth title, I don't know, but if you would maybe pick that up. And Daniel, why don't you begin this round?
Yeah, that's a fun question. It's something I've actually been struggling heavily with as I'm situated in this place of comfort and privilege in the academy. You can relate to this, how the academy could be very insular, very elitist, and very removed from the world. And yeah, writing my dissertation right now, when my people are going through a genocide is not something that is realistic or meaningful. It doesn't feel that way, at least. Yeah, so theology, what does it mean to be a theologian, and especially in my context? I don't know if you know what the word theology means. It comes from the Greek, theos is God, and logia, logic, which is basically, it's meant to signify reasoned speech about the divine, right? How do we speak rationally, reasonably, logically, if you will, about the theos, the divine? And that is kind of the essence of the definition of theology, reasoned, hopefully, reasoned and good speech about the divine, and then by extension, whatever emanates from the divine, all of creation, and so on. And so, as an academic discipline, as other disciplines, it's a discipline that is committed to reason. It's committed to committing to the truth, to speaking truth, to analyzing ideas critically, objectively, and honestly. It's a discipline that pursues telling true stories. But however, in the academy, there's that tension, right? The tension between this classical model of doing scholarship, which is, like I said, dispassionate and removed and esoteric. I can remember at the University of Chicago, I was taking a course on Immanuel Kant, and our idea of having fun as these philosophy nerds is to go to the pub and drink beer and discuss the Critique of Pure Reason by Kant. And that is kind of what made us so excited, is to discuss the works of Kant. And it's like, then you just think, it's like, who cares? Like, why is this so, like, why are we so passionate about it? But that's the thing, it creates this kind of culture of, we're so smart. We can say intelligent things about Kant. None of us knew what we were talking about. But that's the thing, it creates this culture, this attitude that, yeah, I can talk about things that 99.99% of humanity doesn't care about, but I understand it, and I feel so empowered by it. So there's that kind of classical model of scholarship, of this esoteric knowledge that is so unavailable to anyone else. It's available to me because I'm smart. And so that's kind of what we call the ivory tower, right? The expert, the professionals, the elites who talk about these ideas. And then there's more, and this is something through my own journey of faith, if I may call it this, the embodied theology. This is incarnational theology, theology that actually cares, that is actually driven by concern and love for people, right? The incarnation, the idea that the divine comes to earth and the divine dwells with us. So how do you do it? Like, what is that embodied theology? It is theology that pays attention to those next to you, that is critical, that is reflective, that is driven by love of truth, but also love of neighbor, right? And that is not the model that is adopted in the academy, not in the West at least. And that's where we as Palestinian intellectuals and theologians and others are now, especially as someone like me who is so connected to North America and to the academy, and I'm a product of it, but always feel alienated by it because of the positionality, because of its knowledge production that has been so harmful to me. And that's when this orientation that happens. And, rather than relying on the academy to give me what I need to know to function in the world, there is a new discovery, I think, of theology from the margins, or knowledge production from the margins, especially for us as Palestinians right now, especially with what's happening, the Global South, our connection to the Global South. So whilst at least myself, where, patted myself on the back for discussing Immanuel Kant, now I found knowledge and goodness and beauty and truth in the knowledge production of those in South Africa, in Latin America, Black communities, indigenous communities. So that is the embodied theology that is coming from out of suffering and out of turmoil, that is trying to speak life and goodness into the world. So in many sense, if that is the theology I want to live, this is the way this is how my life is motivated and is driven. It has to be an embodied life of living, of incarnational living, that is committed to those who are suffering and next to me. And so I'm writing my dissertation right now, and you don't really know what I'm doing my research on. It's not interesting. But then what's interesting is, like, how do I live now when when there's a genocide? What do I do? What is my responsibility as an academic who's a product of the academy? So in that sense, activism is a product, it goes hand in hand with my being a theologian. And they have to go hand in hand. And there's no other way to be responsible, to tell truthful stories, to be committed to truth if I'm not embodied, if I'm not involved in using my talents and my skills for the goodness of my people and the goodness of humanity. And I do this, for example, in many ways, in public speaking and writing and so on. There's something I'm doing now, which is I'm passionate about. This is a shameless plug, my podcast, Across the Divide. Check it out if you listen to podcasts. But that's kind of been a space for me, and honestly, it's been therapy to create a space where I could also process my feelings and my thoughts, and also help others to think better about their faith, about peacemaking, about justice, about the scriptures, about Zionism. We're running a series right now about Christian Zionism, for example, on the podcast, so it might be interesting to you. But that's a way where, yeah, I am in the academy, but there's a way that I can be involved in working with the community, especially in the West, to think better about Palestine and Israel. So yeah, I think I reject that ivory tower model, and I see if I live authentically, and I'm driven by love of neighbor and love of self. I think activism, to be hands and feet of Christ, if you use that language, makes a lot of sense to me. And that's the only way I can live, right? That's the only way we can live if I live responsibly. If in the middle of a genocide, it's going to be told, what did you do, Daniel? What did we do when there's a genocide, right? So that's the most authentic and real way I can live. So.
Yeah, I think for me, you know, one of the things I'm learning to do is really emphasize that context matters, right? It's been a year since the beginning of the genocide, but my journey kind of trying to keep that path of trying to do theology and activism. I think it's a story of kind of, you know, my life journey, my faith journey, because, you know, I grew up in a home that we went to church, and, you know, I took my Christianity seriously, and living in a context where enemies are pronounced, you know, loving your enemy, being a peacemaker, meant to me to do something about it in my context. And, you know, maybe part of it is growing up as a Palestinian in a majority Israeli Jewish context, you know, knowing both languages, know both cultures. I felt like a call, or maybe I could use this to be a bridge. And I tried to do peace building, right? Doing dialogue groups coming from my faith. But as I did it, things were getting worse. The more we tried to do dialogue groups, the situation on the political horizon just got worse. And I think for me, the changing point was the war in 2014, because something in the way that war was conducted broke me and made me ask the question, is what I'm doing right now the most effective and influential for my people to be treated in dignity, equality? And I had to make that decision between me and myself, is where do I want to put my voice, and where do I want to influence? And it was in some ways crisis of faith, because if you think that's what you were supposed to be doing, and then you kind of, something happens that shakes you, it was really hard. And interestingly enough, it was working in dialogue groups. It was trying to promote peace that I was met with theologies that countered it, that said peace is not impossible. Read your Bible, you know, we are doomed. You know, God's plan to this place is doom and gloom, and all that theology that comes to it. And it shook me, it shook my faith, and I had to sit with that discomfort and trying to reconfigure what it is that I do. So I think in some ways my life has always been trying to close the gap of the dissonance between what our theology is and what we do as Christians, right? There's two different things, what we say and what we do. And so I called myself a disillusioned peacemaker for a long time, because what does it mean to be a peacemaker in a context of genocide, right? In a context that's choosing violence as the only solution to the situation here. And really, a lot of it is again, a place of privilege, perhaps. So when I came to Canada to study, I was already done in the sense of, I am no longer interested to engage in Western theologies that other me. I'm, so much Palestinian Christians put so much energy and effort to tackle and decenter Christian Zionism. But it left me with the question, well then, how can I define myself other than what am I against? What does it mean to be a Palestinian Christian aside from anti-Christian Zionist, right? And so my journey began, and honestly for me, I came and did the Indigenous and Interreligious Studies program because in my head, I said, I want to maybe learn more from the indigenous context, right? They've gone through 500 years of settler colonialism. What wisdom can they teach me as a member of a people group who have gone, through 70, 80 years of settler colonialism? So I came to study, and really it's a place of privilege to be able to come here, in some ways benefit from the system here, realizing my positionality as well coming into Canada, not only that dual positionality that I am here benefiting from a settler colonial system while escaping perhaps or leaving another system. There are interconnected, and the more I studied the topic, I was amazed, really, maybe that's my ignorance of not knowing enough about the indigenous context. I was amazed of the parallels of how much writing is about these two contexts. However, as I advanced in my research, there wasn't a lot in theology, which is surprising because, right, the doctrine of discovery and manifest destiny and Christian Zionism use a lot of the conquest language. And I think through my research, but also through my networks talking about it, I think I'm able to amalgamate that activism with theology and really asking about who am I and where am I, because context matters. And I think it's helping me refine my framework, trying to understand what's going on. But I want to share something that I've written to try to kind of grasp this moment and what's it been like for me as a Palestinian in the last year, while at one hand trying to remain active, remain hopeful that the situation is going to change and ceasefire is coming, but at the same time, it's only been more casualties and more pain. We can end with that if you want to go to the next question. I said, since October 7th, 2023, I find myself inhabiting multiple realities, a perpetual state of emotional jet lag. Like travelers caught between time zones, I'm simultaneously living in Pacific time, now Eastern time, and Gaza time. My body and mind never quite synchronized. I wake up to morning here while following night raids there, eat lunch while tracking down evacuations, try to sleep while monitoring real-time bombardments. This isn't just about different time zone. It's about living in multiple states of being, attempting normalcy in one reality while carrying intergenerational trauma triggered anew in another. My days follow a pattern shaped by this temporal and emotional displacement. Wake up, check the news, compulsively, attempt to work, return repeatedly to news feeds, seeking reassurance of loved ones' survival. Like jet lag's disruption of our natural rhythms, this constant switching between realities, between here and there, between ordinary life and extraordinary devastation, leaves me perpetually disoriented, never fully present in either space, always carrying the weight of the other. And the chronology of horror unfolds in this disjointed time. Babies in incubators at El Ahli Hospital, the massed exodus south, young Hind Rajab's desperate calls, tents burned as people shelter inside, water infrastructure deliberately destroyed, children clustering around the aid trucks, disease spreading, people imprisoned in their own land. Each event triggers not just present pain, but historical memory. Each loss connected to generation of losses before, creating a spiral of time where past and present trauma merge. Yet, in this perpetual jet lag between realities, between trauma old and new, we find ways to persist. As Ecclesiastes reminds us, there is a time to weep and there's a time to laugh, a time to be silent and a time to speak. There is a time for everything. Though in our disoriented state, these times may often overlap, coexist, blur together. And we're asking existential questions like Daniel said. Where's God in the midst of our suffering? How do we lament the losses that have been caused? What is the cost of our activism? So I think for me, theology, it's also a place of sumud, trying to persist and to maintain, even though reality is hopeless. Theology is that place that keeps me going, and just choosing to believe, choosing to reimagine a different reality despite the current reality.
Thank you both. Very, very powerful thoughts that I'm sure each one of us have taken in and begin to think about our own beings in terms of being theologians and being activists, and where that sits with us in our lives, the importance of context here and what we do with that. So I, for one, am deeply grateful to the two of you. You've brought together theology and activism in a very clear yet disquieting, ambiguous way for all of us, and the struggle that's part of that. So thank you, thank you. It's hard to turn to my third question. And remember, for all of you, there are going to be people that are going to wander around to pick up your questions. So if you haven't written them out yet, now is the time to do so. The third question is really to move towards the founder of this lecture, Professor James Graff, the annual lecture in his honor. You heard he was a professor of philosophy at the University of Toronto and an activist focused on human rights in Palestine. His doctoral dissertation was entitled "The Concept of a Moral Agent." As a professor, his teaching focused on ethics and political philosophy. I hear a lot of that in what you two have just shared with us. But perhaps you would expand on that a little bit. What do you think it means for those of us who come from a faith basis, or those who have no faith, to be a moral agent in the present reality of genocide, apartheid, and ethnic cleansing in Palestine that's very, very present in your lives and present in our lives every time we turn on the television or read the newspaper? What does it mean to be a moral agent in times like it, in a time like this? I'm going to ask which one of you would like to begin. Would you like to?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me see if I can crack it. The thing is with this war, and for me, it revealed this kind of ugly underbelly of this facade of Western democracy and human rights and justice and all that nonsense. It's not real. It's like a whole mirage that I believed in, and and I thought it was true and good, and also there's a bit of disillusionment with my kin like with my siblings in the faith. And you know, like Christians, there's this thing that, I don't know if you, this is a discourse that you have a lot with a lot of Christians in the Middle East. This has to do with Christian-Muslim relations, where there's a lot to unpack here, but there's a sentiment among many Christians. It's like, we are the good guys. Muslims, they have issues with women and sexuality and violence, but we are the good guys. We are the good people. We are nonviolent, and we treat our women well, and so on. And there's this kind of this sense of we are this kind of spiritual elitism, that we are Christians. We're the good guys, and so I'll put that onto the side. But that's kind of part of a large kind of idea that many Christians believe, that we're enlightened. We have the gospel. We're Christians. We lead civilization, and I think the war has revealed how fake that is, and that is not really true. And part of our trauma and lament and grief right now is to see that so many Christians are so okay with a genocide, and not just okay, and they're supporting it, and they're using the Bible, they're weaponizing the text to justify it. And here, as a Palestinian Christian, and there's a long history of disconnect that we have continuously felt with the West. Connection with our own Muslim and Arabic backgrounds, but also had that affinity towards the West at the same time. We have the same theology and the same beliefs. Not like that with Muslims. We share a lot with the West. We speak the language of Islam and the Quran, but we are in the family of the faith with Western Christians. So this, and then you would come and see Christians justifying the war, quoting Romans 13 to justify just war theory, using examples of Amalek to justify the ethnic cleansing in Gaza. And it hits home, like, wait, is this real? Like, are we still doing this in 2023, 2024? So yeah, like, what does it mean to be a Christian when you have lost any ethical or moral sensibilities? When you can so quickly and so easily able to have an immoral application of your faith and also politics. I wish I had known Professor Graff. I wish I had run his dissertation to prepare and see how I can be in conversation with his dissertation and how we can apply it to this moment. What does it mean to be a moral Christian during a genocide, right? So I don't know what he would say right now, and how would he respond to this crisis of faith that we're dealing with, where Christians are either apathetic or cheerleaders for genocide. But yeah, I don't know what a moral agent is. I don't know what Professor Graff meant by it. I would say that a moral agent is someone whose impulses, whose decision-making, whose actions are rooted in their ethical convictions and in a clear understanding of truth, of justice, of mercy, of international law, and so on, that they are principled, that morality matters to them, and morality is the impetus and the root, the foundation of their decision-making. And that should be easy. Like, because the thing is, we are not merely moral agents. We're also individuals who are products of their environments and of their biases and of their cultural milieu and cultural understandings, of their own convictions, of their education, of their limited knowledge, of their exposure to media. So with all of that baggage, with all of these perspectives and biases, how can you be moral, right? How can be a Bible-loving, a sweet Christian be okay with the dehumanization of Palestinians, right? There's a breakup, because they would tell you, I love my neighbor as myself. And I love everyone. It's like, okay, you do you? Let's talk about it, So there is that disconnect that happens there. Like, you can believe that, but then you'll be okay with the killing of women and children in Gaza. And that is consistent in your world. That makes sense. It can be justified, and you can say your prayers and go to bed. So there's something so messed up in that. So yeah, and I think therefore we have to be critical. If we are to be moral agents, we have to be critical. You talked about context, that there's this inherited. I don't know how to make sense of, honestly, all of this. Like, how do you understand this indecent and unequivocal, uncritical support for death and murder and hatred. And we have to understand that people in the West, and this is kind of my own analysis here, is there is an inherited bigotry towards Arabs and Muslims. This is what is known as Orientalism. And there's a lot that has been done on this. You can check the work of Edward Said and many more after him who reflected on this historic animosity and condescension towards Arabs and Muslims as being savage, being barbaric, being sexually deviant, and so on. But that's part of this Enlightenment project, that we are the hardworking, the enlightened, the good people. We have reached it, and those others haven't. And the West always had their savages, right? It's not just the Arab and the Muslim. It's also the Black. It's also the First Nations. It's also indigenous populations everywhere. It's also Black South Africans. It's also Blacks in the U.S. It's also, schools here in India, in Canada. What do you call charter schools? You call them the residential schools, right? So they always had that. You always had that savage, that their matter, their history, their identity, their culture is inferior, and you need to shake them out of that inferior culture. You force them to speak English or French, or you make them Christians. So the savage is always there, and I would argue the savage, whether the savage was the Black South African or was it the European Jew in Europe or the Palestinian, it's the same ethos, it's the same idea that we are Christians and we are the West and we can do this to other people. What the weaponizing of the Bible, and I mentioned this, has been very clear. Good, loving, Bible-believing, Christ-following Christians justified slavery. Same as Christians who justified the Holocaust and anti-Semitism and apartheid and segregation, and you name it, right? And the Palestinian is the new savage now, and has been for a long time. Gideon Levy, an Israeli journalist, once said that the Jew has become the new white man, and the Palestinian has become the new Jew, right? So there was the Jew of the time, but now that Jew is the white man, and now the Palestinian is the Jew of the 20th century. And that is real, right? Now this is the savage that we can kill, and so on. So what does it mean to be moral? I think all of you are examples of that. You're showing up, you're doing the work, you're protesting, you're writing to representatives, you're following values and principles that are not dictated by your culture, by your Canadian government, by your media, right? You're standing up against the onslaught of bigotry and hatred. So I don't have to define it for you, you're defining it yourselves, and we're grateful for you. And you're one of those people who are saying we refuse to be those complicit Canadians who were silent during the Holocaust, who were silent during slavery and segregation. And you have chosen to be those people in this moment right now. And fundamentally for me, being the moral agent is just knowing how to love my enemy as myself, and to love my neighbor as myself. And in many ways, our advocacy for the people of Gaza, just saying, I am that person in Gaza, I am Hind, I am all these people. They are me and I am them. And in many ways, Christians historically have always lagged behind in standing up to evil and injustice, right? As Christians who were nonchalant about anti-Semitism and Nazism and the Holocaust. It is the Christians who were okay with slavery. It made a good economic sense for them, right? And it's happening again. And that's why I think Gaza is really a theological crisis. It's not just a war, it's not just a genocide, it's also a theological crisis and a cultural crisis in the West. It reveals that we are stuck in the same ideology and bigotry of the last 300, 400 years of colonization and oppression and violence and so on. Thankfully, you are on those who are on the right side of history, but obviously there's so much work to kind of rekindle that moral agency that we should have as a society and as people.
I think to add to what Daniel, I was thinking about that even when that question was raised, and I think morality is kind of in the time of genocide, it's a casualty almost, because it's put under this paradigm of sum zero mentality, right? In the sense like our compassion, even over here in Canada, is being fought over. And your compassion should be exclusive. You cannot be compassionate towards Israelis alone. You cannot, or the need is you either are compassionate to Israelis or to Palestinians, right? And we're put in this paradigm, and there's a competition over our compassion, which really steers our morality of what is right to do and what is not. And I think for me, that competition and that created paradigm makes us think, how we frame the danger of language, right? Using certain words that already trigger us to go either to one way or another, using certain languages, especially using the Bible or religious language. I mean, the same story about the Amalekites, the verses that were used by the Prime Minister Netanyahu, were also used against the indigenous people just before Wounded Knee in 1890. I mean, Bible has been used again and again, because I think also leads us to ask the question is, what's going on in our Bible? What kind of scripture are we reading, and does it fit our contemporary morality? And we need to sit with that discomfort, that there are some texts in the Bible that are problematic, and if used to justify, and is used to justify contemporary violence. And I think as Palestinians, we have experienced this very much so with the similar theologies that claim us as foreigners in our own lands because we don't fit this very literal view of reading the Bible, and in many ways tries to cover up God's compassion and God's love for all, that God doesn't distinguish his love or doesn't stop loving people because of their ethnicity or their background, but we're all created in God's image. And in our basis of our advocacy as moral agents is to say God loves everyone regardless of their background or ethnicity, especially as descendants or with lineage to the first Christians or the Abrahamic religions in the same area. And I think the tendency is to make the world very binary, very simple. It's black or white, good and bad, right? And making our morality seemingly easy to make the right decision. And don't forget, we're also, I mean, the system is asymmetric. Mainstream media are a lot of the leaders have bought into this binary view, the very simplistic. And I think, to think a bit more, I think it's the nation states. I mean, in some ways, if violence is perpetrated by a state, it's okay, it's moral, it's legitimate, and it highlights, I think, in some ways, to add to Daniel, that the whole world system is still based on the use of violence, of warfare, how much money, right? Economy is still really reliant on warfare as a primary means to maintain the current system. And the question for us as moral agents is, choosing not, we have multiple identities. So as Canadian, what is our role to do? How do we apply our moral agency as Canadians, as Christians, bringing in people, making sure that nothing is done in our name without having moral clarity that we agree with or we don't. And that's why many of you and many of us persist to speak, to tell our stories, to write letters, because we know this is our activism, or this is taking our moral agency into play and keep going at it, in a sense. I think I'll stop here, yeah.
Do you two want to spend an extra day and come to my place? And we'll just sit and talk? There's so many thoughts going through my head as you have both spoken. about moral agency, about dualism, about the way the world is framed. And anyway, maybe you'll both come back to my house sometime and we'll have a meal together. I'm supposed to be the timekeeper, so I have to watch my time here. But I thought just one very brief piece of advice from both of you to us. What would you most like to see from Canadians? I think we heard it in a lot of what you said, but sum it up for us. What would you like to say to us, to leave with us, and to leave with us in terms of that government of ours that we're having to work with? Just a minute or two of advice to us. Shadia, why don't you start? Since you've been here for a while.
I was going to say, but just to, on the previous one, I actually had a friend in Vancouver, and she told me that she met James Graff when she was studying in Toronto in one of the protests for Palestine. So I was like, really? She's like, yeah, he was great lecturer, but also very passionate, and he was very active. So just want to say that that connection to James is still present even to people who have been in his circles as well. As someone who's been here and have been more maybe involved in seeing how how the Canadians around me have been taking their agency as citizens, as concerned citizens to the government, I think you should keep going, keep doing what you're doing, because I think in the Canadian example, when you write letters and when you hold your MPs, you hold them accountable, you actually see the change. It's not maybe what we want, but I think we keep going. We are serious about what we want. We want a ceasefire. So I want to thank you for really the commitment that you have expressed and you're working with in due diligence, and just keep going. Don't give up. Write more letters if you can. But really, it's an example of, for me, is to see how the system works when you actually raise your voice and you demand accountability.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what you're doing here, but I'm sure it's wonderful. So yes, I agree, keep doing it. But just from my insights and my extensive knowledge in Canada, I've been here for 1 day now, so I can say this about what you're doing and what you can do better. No, actually, I have some hopefully good thoughts. I would like you to invest in the youth, in the young people of Canada. You're wonderful, but where are the young people? You know, where are the men? We have like 5, 6 men here. What's wrong with you guys? There's something wrong. Like, guys are so annoying. I don't know what, so there's work to be done in having the young professionals, youth involved. You guys have a wonderful collective knowledge and wisdom and experience of all the hard work and dedication and commitment to the cause. We need to make sure that this is going to be given to the next generations, the next political leaders, the next pastors and clergy and lay people. So I would love for you to think strategically how that knowledge continues, how you can pass the baton to the next generation of Canadians. I know the situation in churches could be rough these days, but I don't know the challenges you face with that. But I think I would love to see a young generation of youth and young professionals who are also being activated, motivated by their faith or not. But would love to see more of that zeal and passion that you have to be also given to the young. Something also I'm kind of wrestling with, and that's from some of the conversations I had last night at dinner. I'm kind of wondering of possibilities of you reaching to people across the aisle from you, those on the other side, whether it's conservatives, whether it's evangelicals, whether it's these people that we just don't like. And yeah, I think there's something in that in reaching out to them and extending a hand of peace and encouraging them to think better and to act better. I think you have enough grace and goodness and charity and patience. You have a lot of patience where you can do that. I think that's important. I think we've become a choir where we preach to each other. I think there's a way for us to move away from our choir becomes the preachers to other choirs. So I don't know, if you can think of ways where you can lovingly, charitably try to reach out to those folks that you have considered to be a lost cause, I think that would be important for this struggle we have. Something you're doing obviously right now, since you have both of us here, but keep listening to Palestinians. I've noticed a lot of advocacy groups do not listen to Palestinians. They speak about us, but not with us. Nothing about us without us. So I think that's important. Read what read what we're writing, center our voices. I think it's important that we do this together. And you're doing it, obviously. But I need to emphasize this, that we have wonderful Palestinians, Christians, Muslims, otherwise, who are doing incredible work. So keep centering them. I think it's important. Yeah, and I think you have to confront Christian Zionism. And I don't mean here Zionism that is kind of dispensationalism or evangelical Zionism, or Zionism is also in the mainstream church, the mainline church. On my podcast, not to plug that again, check out my podcast, but I had a conversation with Robert. Oh, thanks for asking. It's called Across the Divide. But I had a conversation for the series on Christian Zionism with Robert Smith. He's a historian. He wrote a book on the roots of Christian Zionism, and he made that point that actually Christian Zionism goes back all the way to the Reformation, of how Protestants were trying to think, because of their own kind of Reformation, they're trying to think of how they can relate to the others in their environment. So that includes Catholics, but also the Turks, Muslims, who reached Austria, reached Europe, also the Jewish people. And in many ways, their fantasies and their anxieties about the end times and non-Christians kind of led eventually to the formation of the othering of Jewish people. And that kind of became kind of the root of Christian Zionism. So as to say, and then you can also extend that to North America and the whole vision of a promised land, a land without a people, for a people without a land. That is a language that was used for the pilgrims who came here, to the colonists, but also for the European Jews who came to Palestine, right? This is a land without a people, for a people without a land. So as to say Christian Zionism and an obsession with manifest destiny is in the DNA of this country, a little bit. So it's not that, oh, these are these fundamentalists who are kind of out there. This is also part of your culture and identity. So when I say confront it, you have to also understand that Christian Zionism is only an outgrowth of a very problematic kind of ideology that is kind of undergirding all of this. So yeah, think of ways to confront that in an active way. I can stop here. Yeah, and just continue supporting, and you're doing this, just continue supporting Palestinian organizations, groups, individuals. We need you and we need each other. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry to have to pull that to an end, but I need to give you a stretch break. Don't go anywhere, just stand up and stretch where you are while I receive the questions that you have posted, and from those that are, I always look up when I think of people online. I don't know why, but for those that are online, and then we'll regroup and have a few minutes for questions. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we got a deluge. Oh no. So I've done my best here. Okay, and I've texted you some more. So these are kind of
Here's one. Is a two-state solution a proper response to genocide and occupation? Why don't we start with that? And then peace-loving Christians want dialogue, and so are sometimes hesitant to take sides. So there's one that you were talking about, okay? Each side can reconcile, or not reconcile, or a little reconcile. Have you sort of, yeah, do you want to? We've only got about 15 minutes, so then I'll have to be very quick with lots of. Okay, each of you is involved in two institutions, academic, religious. How have these institutions supported you or minimized these issues? That's a really good one. Who'd like to take one? I can do it. Yeah. Okay. Why don't I call people back together?
I was just going to say that we're a little bit behind schedule.
I know. I think we'll now move to the questions. We are a little behind in terms of our time, but we'll try and get a few of your questions in. As I was talking to Daniel and Shadia, each of them took 2 or 3 questions that they would like to address, but very briefly. So you'll just hear a quick answer on each of these questions. So let's give them a chance to respond to some of the questions that you've asked. Daniel, do you want to start with?
Yeah, I don't know if I can read the handwriting though. This might be a struggle. Peace-loving Christians want dialogue and reconciliation, so are sometimes hesitant to take sides, protest loudly, call out evil by name. How can we be bold and loving at the same time in our activism? There's a tension between quiet diplomacy and advocacy, quiet diplomacy and noisy advocacy, maybe? I don't know. I mean, I get the gist of the question. It's a good question. Yeah, I think peace-loving Christians, I don't know what peace means. Like, what does peace mean? There's this negative sense of peace, which is absence of conflict. And then there's the active sense of peace, which is about being a product of wholeness and wholesome being and justice, right? So the Roman Empire had Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, and that was peaceful, but it was a peace of oppression and violence and racism and so on. But that was, negative peace. But positive peace is a peace that is a product of something that is good. So if you claim to be peace-loving Christians, then you have to ask, what do you mean by peace? And what do you mean that you love peace? In the Beatitudes, Jesus says, blessed are those who are hungry and thirsty for righteousness, right? And that is usually understood to be pious and to be good and so on. But actually the word for righteousness is the same word for justice. So he's saying that blessed are those who are thirsty and hungry for justice. Blessed are the peacemakers, right? Those who do the work of peace, not the peace-loving people, is the peacemakers, right? So peace is a product of work and of hard work. And it's peace is a product of those who are hungry and thirsty for what's right and what's good in the world. So you cannot be peace-loving and not being active and working. And advocacy, political action, writing, is peace working itself out in a real practical way, right? If you have someone who struggles next to you and you need to love, and you want to love that person, your love shows through action. This is obvious, right? I'm not saying anything like radical here. Love in public is what justice looks like, right? If you pursue justice actively, you're acting in a way that you want to love your neighbor and love your enemy and love yourself. So yeah, the dichotomy that being peace-loving, you have to be like chill and kind and sweet. That's just not what peace is. I think, like the idea of shalom, the biblical shalom, that is established through God's work in creation and through human response to it. This is not passive, this is active, and this is a hard work of reconciling divinity with humanity, what's whole and what's broken coming together. So that is what peace is, that is what shalom is, that is wholeness established after the hard work of reconciliation. I don't know if this is coherent to you, but that's kind of my take on that.
How can you align the concept of God who loves us with the horrible genocide in Gaza? That's a very hard question. I think part of it for me is, which is relatively due to the concept of decolonizing my theology, right? When I read the Bible, I read it from a place of vulnerability, a place of powerlessness. And so to read that and to the concept of God loving me and my people, it's in the sense that looking at these elements of vulnerability also that I can resonate with when I read scripture. A lot of the books of the scripture were written, for example, after traumas, after disasters, right? And that writing the Gospels, for example, was their way to maybe process their trauma. It wasn't written from a place of victory, actually. It was written from a place of vulnerability, waiting, holding these promises that they have heard and passing them on to us. So aligning the concept of God who loves us with the horrible genocide in Gaza is that understanding of hope, of the ability to reimagine a different reality, in the sense that we are not destined to this reality. We can do better. We, as agents, can be proactive in changing that. Because we've experienced God's love, we know what it is, so we want to extend this love to others. So I think in that sense, being able to sit with that genocide and the pain and the suffering that's going, but also being comforted in the incarnation that the suffering and death doesn't have the last word, right? A resurrection came. There is that hope in something different.
Can I also work on this question? Yeah, thanks. I think it depends on how you define God. If God is aloof and distant and far away on the throne, then God is irrelevant, and God is callous and evil, because obviously God doesn't care about what's happening in Gaza. But if you see God through the cross, a God who is broken and who is with us, we Christian Palestinians said, Christ is in the rubble, that we see the divine in every child in Gaza, that is where God is. That is the God that I follow, honestly. I cannot conceive of a God who's on a, not that I want to be unorthodox here, but like right now in the genocide, God is not on the throne. God is here with me. He's weeping with me. So this is the God that I believe in, the incarnate God, the broken God who weeps, who the suffering servant who weeps with us and who grieves with us, and who's broken about the evil of humanity. I see God in the children of Gaza and the women of Gaza and the men of Gaza. And that is a God that I want to follow, and that's a God that I can love and know, because that's a God who loves Gaza and who's with Gaza. Yeah, and to echo the biblical tradition, that biblical tradition is written by people who suffered in exile. A lot of the Hebrew scriptures are written in exile, of people who lost God. And where is God? And in a lot of the text is that yearning to go back, to restore the fortunes of old. And then comes Christ to us, and he lived with a people who were also oppressed under an occupation. And he comes and proclaims this news, good news to the oppressed that have come. He opened the scroll of Isaiah and says, today this has been fulfilled, that the oppressed will be set free, and that the blind shall see. And that is the God that I can see, the God who is on the side of the oppressed, what we call the preferential option for the poor, that God is on the side of those who are suffering and mourning. He's on the side of people in Gaza. And not the aloof, faraway God, white man with a beard kind of God. So yeah, and that's what gives me hope. That's because, and yeah, if looking through the cross, and remembering this is the God who suffered, but also this is the God who can lead us through our trials into life more abundant, and that's the hope that we have, and we need to hold fast to that.
I'm looking at Rula. Do we have time for one more question? One more. You see, it's not me. We blame her. One more question.
We have some good questions here. I know, Rula. There's a question. Okay.
You're not going to run off afterwards, though.
No, okay.
So there'll be corner them afterwards if there's a particular question.
I wish we can have a vote on the questions. Here's a question. There's a question about the one-state solution, two-state solution. I don't know if you care about that. And there's a question here. What would you say to Christians who don't want to speak up for Palestine in their churches because churches are not places for politics? Should we answer, which question do you prefer? Both of them? Okay, the second one. Yes, I'll try to be brief. If I'm brief enough, maybe we can go to the other one. I reject the premise of the question. I don't think it depends how you define politics. If politics is, being in government and fighting each other and laws and regulation, that's one kind of politics. But if politics is the ordering of humanity, of societies, and of seeking the welfare of the polity, then that is a very Christian vocation, that we care for the well-being of people around us. So Christianity, the church, is actually a place of politics. Where you sit is political, right? Where the priest sits is political. Like, all of this is organized in a functional way, and that's what politics is. And I would say this question reveals a very narrow, simplistic understanding of faith that thinks that faith is more about my spirituality and sin and heaven. And I just shared this before. The gospel, at least how we understand our faith, is Christ is Lord over everything, and that includes our money, our pockets, our economy, our politics, our relationships, and so on. So if Christ is Lord, then he also speaks to our politics. For us to be faithful is to follow after the way of Christ, who centered his ministry on the oppressed and the marginalized, on women, on Samaritans, on the crippled and the naked and the poor. And that was what politics is, to create a better system for those people. So our faith, our gospel, is grounded in a political critique of empire, of violence, and of restoration and healing to everyone. So this apolitical reading of Christianity, I think, is an abuse of Christianity. That's not the Christianity of the New Testament. Okay, I'll stop.
That's okay. I'm just giving Shadia.
I agree with Daniel. I think it depends on the understanding of politics. But I would also say, maybe let's talk offline. I'm happy to come and talk to that person and see, because I think it's also a question of, they don't have to be the ones to talk. They can invite Palestinians or others to do the talking on their behalf. Someone sharing their testimony, if that's a language that's more comfortable for them, because like we said, like for us, it's just the fact of who we are is already kind of blurring the lines of what is our understanding of the context, but also what it means to be a Christian in a place where Christians can't not necessarily all Christian denominations can worship freely or with the same status as others. But that's a whole other question related to Christian presence in Israel and Palestine, and how many of them are recognized as churches and how many aren't. But there are many ways, entry points to talk about that, so maybe we can talk offline, and happily we'd be happy to help in any way possible.
Thank you, both of you, so much. I could do an hour-long summary, but I'm going to forestall all of that and just simply say Thank you very much to both of you, and I know Rula wants to do the same. Apologies that we didn't get to a lot of your questions, but the two of them are not running off anywhere, and so please color them and ask questions if you see fit. But again, join me in giving them a big word of thanks.
And thank you, Dorcas, for moderating two exceptional speakers who really gave us a lot to think about and inspired us and encouraged us in so many ways, and talking about very important, timely topics, both the theology, the practice, very, very practical and wise advice. So we're so blessed to have had you. We're hoping we'll have opportunities to have more conversations with you. Clearly, there's lots to talk about. So thank you once again to both of you. It's really appreciated. I wanted to just quickly tell you a little bit about some of the activities we're doing as Canadian Friends of Sabeel, and I was actually encouraged to hear about some of the advice that we got from both of you, because actually that is exactly what Canadian Friends of Sabeel is doing. We're hosting conferences and webinars like this one. We're doing speaking tours. We're supporting authentic Christian pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and delegations where people can go and see and then come and tell. And those are very powerful when people come back and witness in their churches or in their Christian groups. We're doing all kinds of artistic media-related things like theater productions, film, photo exhibits. We're providing a lot of resources to churches, such as liturgies and so on. Those are important to support our Canadian churches. We are trying to work increasingly ecumenically with the churches, share our experiences across churches. We do want to go to the youth and the seminaries and help educate future leaders in the Christian church. Obviously, we've done a lot of work on opposing Christian Zionism as well. So we've also done fundraising for Gaza in the past, and we actually raised funds for solar panels at the Al Ahli Hospital. And we know that obviously all the hospitals have been devastated, but we know that at least for a while those solar panels help to keep the hospital going. So we do ask for your support if you want to see more of these kinds of activities, more of these programs, for us to bring more speakers like these amazing up-and-coming knowledgeable Palestinian Christian speakers, for us to support also and amplify the voices of Palestinians back in the Holy Land, but also here, to provide that kind of solidarity. That's important for us. We do have, on Canada Helps, you can find us if you'd like to donate over there. We also have our Christmas appeal just started. We have envelopes outside. Our theme this year is Sumud, which means persistence and resilience and steadfastness. So for those of you who are on our email list, you'll hear about that. And if you're not on our email list, please join us on that list. Check out our website. We do have a lot of our co-sponsors are selling arts and crafts that are basically fundraising for advocacy and for Gaza as well. So please check out, we have 4 beautiful paintings by a Palestinian artist, and these are all efforts to fundraise for the Palestinians and for advocacy for the Palestinians. I want to thank Samia for the beautiful song that she did earlier, and I'd like her to come up. She's going to do one more song we'll leave you with one more song just to help you center yourself and absorb all the amazing information and heartfelt amazing advice and information. She'll help us to center that. She'll sing a song called My Mother's Scarf. These are words by the Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish, and Samia composed a song that she'll sing those words to it. And it's a very beautiful poem set to beautiful music. So I'll leave you with Samia for now.
Hi everyone, so this is Mahmoud Darwish. I wrote this song over 25 years ago and was asked to bring it back, and these words were written decades and decades ago by Mahmoud Darwish. But as we listen, I think we'll find that they have as much meaning and poignancy today. And so they were written in Arabic, they've been translated to English. And this is Soft Rain or My Mother's Scarf. And the most important sentence is, I want nothing from my country that has fallen except my mother's scarf and reasons for a new death. And this is how it goes. Soft rain in a distant autumn, and the birds are blue, blue, and the earth is a festival. Don't say that I'm a cloud over the airport. I want nothing from my country that has fallen from the window of a plane, except my mother's scarf and reasons for a new death. Soft rain in a sad autumn, and the trysts are green, and the sun is clay. My face is a dusk, my death is a fetus. I want nothing from the country which has forgotten the accent of a dispossessed, except my mother's scarf and reasons for a new death. Soft rain in a distant autumn, and the birds are blue, and the earth is a festival. The birds have flown into a time of no return. Do you want to know my country? Know what's in between us? My country's a desire, inflames the kiss of sand in the mail. And I want nothing from the home of knives and birds, except my mother's scarf and reasons for. I want nothing from the country which has slain me, except my mother's scarf and reasons for a new day. Yes.
Thank you, Samia. That was beautiful and profound. Really appreciate it. I hope that helped you to process this evening. I hope you found it full of good information, good ideas, good advice, good encouragement. Our work continues. Thank you for your solidarity. And we hope to see you again soon in some of our future activities. And if there's anything we can do to support you, please let us know as well. So God bless you. Have a great rest of the evening, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
How do we help the world to see your plight and pain?